Coach, the first game of the weekend was one that I was not expecting because we get the rematch of the 2020 grand final. We get Richmond, we get Geelong, we get them at the MCG of all places, of course, but we get the Cats beating Richmond by a margin equal to the amount of points that Richmond scored this entire game, 126 to 63. They doubled them up. That I were you who was expecting this? I never saw anything in the media from us included. There was nothing saying that. I was expecting to be a good close game. I wasn't going to be surprised if Geelong won this, but I wasn't expecting them to blow Richmond out of the water, especially with Dusty Martin making his return to the pitch as well. It also didn't help. So Richmond, they did control this game for the majority of it until about halfway through the third, of course. But then you have Geelong just taking over from there. Jeremy Cameron, 4 of his 6 goals in this game came in the second half, and the Cats dominated just about every major stat category besides hitouts. So Richmond, you had more hitouts than the Cats. Good job, you guys. And had 130 more disposals than the Tigers. And man, what a game this was if you're a Cats supporter.
This was a game that I think a lot of people looked at it and thought Geelong's coming off the tough, controversial loss to the Swans, and you're going up against a Richmond team that put a whooping on the Western Bulldogs. So I think a lot of people thought, here we go. This is the Tigers team that we all expected. But some of the injuries that they lost, I think, really affected them. Losing their captain, Trent Cotchin, losing Dylan Grimes in the back. And so they just, I agree with what some of the analysis and some of the things I said. This is not the same Richmond team that we've seen years before. This is not the team that can absorb an injury and go right into it. I mean, they're taking a lot more injuries than they expected. And unfortunately, after this game, they occurred one more that I think really is going to hurt them in the rounds to come. But we'll discuss that a little bit later. But this really was a game where the Tigers started off hot. They really came out of the gates, and I think Geelong came out a little bit flat. But I think Geelong, with their experience, with the team that they've kind of built, they kind of weathered it, settled themselves down, and then they got to play the Cats style of footy. They ran through. They really kind of did something I haven't seen very often. Is they ran through Richmond's pressure. Richmond usually does that tackle pressure, and it causes chaos. Footy gets the ball on the ground. They were running in between tackles. They were running through arm tackles. And once they get through that first wave, the first 2 or 3, then there's 15 to 20 meters of free space because there's not that second wave. They usually are expecting the first wave to make the tackle, get the free, and then they move it up the field.
Yep.
So I really kind of have to give Chris Scott a little bit of credit here because they capitalized in the one weakness of the Richmond tackling pressure, and they got through gaps, and it really opened up the field. And you could see it in the start of the third. Geelong started getting a little momentum. They started really good going, and it became an avalanche, especially late in that game, where Geelong just kind of kept putting up points. Where it was like, okay, how ugly is this going to get? So I'm going to say right now, we could potentially. I'm not saying we are. We could potentially see the end of the Richmond Dynasty this year if this continues because their injuries are starting to mount up, especially in the midfield, which is what they really need. And this Cats team right now, that was a humming performance. If I'm anybody on their fixture list from now into the rest of the season, I'm a little worried because if that Cats team shows up, they are going to be very, very hard to beat.
Well, yeah, you obviously have to have them circled on your calendar and your schedule any time that you're even getting within multiple rounds of having to face this Cats team. And one of the things that was surprising me, Don, you talked about how they're able to just slice and dice their way through the field and through the waves of Richmond defenders. And that was kind of weird to see and kind of threw me off because if you were to throw it back to maybe earlier in the season, the Cats were a bit of this slower team, maybe a little more older, not like these quick, young, really teams that could push the pace. That's I think that's old news at this point, based off what they were able to do to Richmond. We were talking about that Sonis was almost helping or hurting them with the whole still on the mark rule, because you just have guys, the defenders forced to stand there, so you have guys just be able to run off the point, off the mark. You can't do that anymore, I guess, because this Cats team is really trying to starting to find their footing, and that's of course helped tremendously by Jeremy Cameron, which this has to be, at least at this point, the trade of the offseason with 12 goals in 3 games. Remember, he missed the first 5 rounds. He already has 12 goals, and this guy's just doing everything. And imagine how good the Giants could be if they still had them. But I guess that's no good in thinking about that, because that just makes me jealous. I don't like to be the jealous type. Donnie, is this the move of the offseason?
It's hard to argue. It's hard to argue it isn't, but there've been a couple. Like if you there's some Port Adelaide fans that are probably going, well, you gotta argue for Alir. He's come
Yes.
in and really helped out that Port Adelaide defense. And then, I mean, again, not rose-colored glasses here, but I've heard it a lot. The Sydney Swans fans, if you ask them, they'd beat the door down for Tom Hickey.
Mm-hmm.
Hickey's come into a weakness spot for the Swans over the offseason and has been absolutely spectacular. He's gone up against some of the better rucks in the league this last week, going up against Max Gawn, and he held his own and had a pretty good performance himself. So there's quite a nice argument for several players, but I can see where you can make quite a good argument for Jeremy Cameron. And the scary part about it is this season is still going, and him, Gary Rowan, and Tommy Hawkins make for an absolute three-headed monster that right now there are coaches absolutely terrified to play this Cats team and try to have to defend those three right now.